courage, a lot of strength, a lot of sorrow, a lot of confusion, warm memories, some regrets. We're honouring relationships, and we've probably got some questions. We're a bit bewildered. And we all know the times of joy and the times of darkness on a journey like the cancer journey. When we want to be real, we want to be kind and gentle with one another. Somehow we want to be able to look to the future too with some kind of hope. And you know, you would have found and I've found that our responses to loss are all different, aren't they? There's no right or wrong. And I think at times most of us would have felt pressed to our absolute limit and wondered how we could keep going. And we've been forced to face dimensions of this pain that we had no idea about. It's never easy. I'm guessing we've known a lot of anguish and a lot of emptiness. And I also thought, as I was thinking about this evening, an event like this reminds us how fragile this world is. Most of us, I guess, were blindsided by the cancer that entered our worlds, one way or another. And it also, I think, reminds us of our own mortality. And I've learned in the past that sorrow never entirely leaves us, does it? It's incorporated into our story. We accommodate it. But I also have found that sorrow enlarges our souls, and that's a whole other area that we could talk about, I guess. And in this room tonight, there is a lot of lived experience, a lot of wisdom. And I thought, before we go on much further, I wondered if you could, if you don't mind, take up one of those little squares of paper on the table and a pen. I thought just for a couple of minutes, it would be maybe helpful to gather our thoughts a little bit. And I wondered if you would jot down a short response or answer to two questions I just want to run by you. Don't have to share them with anybody. And I'm really thinking of one or two words. But I wanted to ask this, how you would answer this question. One thing I've learned about myself through struggle is. I wonder what you'd write. You might be thinking, I didn't realise I could know such fear, or I didn't know I could be that strong. Anything. Whatever it might be a thing that you learned at that time. And the second question I wanted to ask was this one. One thing that helped me when the going was really hard was, what's one thing you'd write down? It might be as silly as chocolate, or it might be something profound. Doesn't matter. Nothing silly about chocolate, by the way. Maybe later we could share what we wrote down with a good friend that we've come with, because I would like us to have a chance to talk to one another, if we would like to, before the night's over. Maybe reminisce a little bit, maybe say something of our story. But now we have the opportunity to meet and listen to Ruth Barry. And I am so thankful that Ruth is willing to open up something of her journey through cancer, grief and loss, and what she learned through that, or is learning through that. And her experience might help give some of us some language to what we have felt. It might raise some questions we haven't thought about. It could point us to where we might find some meaning in this journey that perhaps feels a bit pointless to us at the moment. I'll give you a short bio of Ruth. Ruth, with her family, came to live here in Menai in January 2001, right as COVID really kicked off, and she was instantly isolated. And she came, she's married to Andrew, who is the senior minister of our church here, and we have loved getting to know both of them. Ruth is the mother of 6 children. I found Ruth to be a delight. I've really enjoyed getting to know her. She's a keen thinker, has great views and thoughts about things. She's a reader, mostly of crime fiction, lawyer sort of stuff. She's a musician. She plays and teaches the piano and another instrument, I think I gathered. And I know she loves to sing. And on good authority, I have it that she sings around the house a lot. Isn't that a lovely thought? And I think that expresses something of the joy that Ruth often displays. She is a lovely, wise lady, and she's really worth listening to, as she has both personally lived with a cancer diagnosis and she's cared for a beloved child in his struggle with cancer. And I know we'll hear something of her heart, and I'm going to let her tell her story. Let's welcome Ruth.
Hi, thank you. Peace. It means so much to us, from I need 5 minutes peace from the kids to what we're thankful for on Anzac Day, or as we remember today, 6th of June, D-Day. I'm going to talk about how I found peace amidst cancer. I'm going to start with a story, true story. About 3 weeks after my son died, spoilers, I went to the supermarket to buy food for dinner. It seems like such a inappropriately mundane activity to do after you've lost a son, but the kids need to eat. So I went to the supermarket and I was very close to tears, and I was putting food in the trolley, and as I walked to the checkout and took the food out and put it on the conveyor belt, I put down the meat, and the lady behind me reached over, started tapping my meat package. I don't know about you, I have boundaries. This crossed my boundary. And she said to me, "What's that?" And I said, "Minute steak." And she kept tapping it. And I said, she said, "How do you cook it?" "You cook it for a minute." And she said, "Oh, okay. And then what?" "Then you eat it." She said, "What do you eat it with?" And I said, "Well, in my household," sorry, I'm a bit echoey. Do I need to move this? No worries, all good? Okay. I said, "I put it with vegetables in a sandwich, and we have a steak sandwich." And she said, "Oh, she's still tapping my meat. She has crossed my boundary lines." And she said, "Do you like it?" And I said, "Yeah, and my kids love it too." She said, "Oh, how many kids do you have?" Now, that's not her fault. She didn't know. She's tapping my meat. She's crossed a line. But it's really hard to answer when you've just lost a child, how many children you have. And I said, "Well, I have had 6, but recently one of my sons died." She's still tapping my meat. And she said, "Oh, what did he die from?" And I said, "Oh, he had cancer." And she said, "Oh, how old?" I said, 15. And I could see she was thinking it through. Oh, she was 16. "What type of cancer?" And I took a deep breath and said, "It doesn't have a name. Nobody knows. He had a tumour in his heart." "Oh. Do you remember when I lived in Mary Street?" And I thought, "I don't know you. I don't know where you used to live." She said, "You'll never believe this. My next door neighbour, Jan, her son, you're not going to believe this, her son had a blood test. Do you know what they found?" Now, most of us in this room know what they found. And I ummed and ahed, do I humour her or do I just go for it? And I said, "Did they find leukemia?" "Yes! How did you know?" Context. And she's still got her hand on my meat. And this conversation has gone on so long that many of the bystanders are listening. I think the lady at the checkout was listening. And I said, well, often you find leukemia through blood tests, and actually, I have leukemia. At this point, she took her hand off the meat. She took a massive step away from me, and she looked me up and down and said, uh-huh. I thought, she thinks I'm the crazy one in this conversation. Life is like that a little bit when you have to admit to people that there are 2 people in your family who have cancer. People don't really believe you, or they think you're somehow contagious, which is not at all the case. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I have 6 kids: Joshua, Nathan, David, Stephen, Hannah and Elijah. There's an old photo of them because we don't have current photos with Nathan gone. But it's lovely to be able to say all 6 names. I don't get to say that very often anymore. I married Andrew. We were high school sweethearts. We were 19 when we got married, and he serves here as the senior minister. I've had many jobs over my lifetime. I was a telemarketer. Yes. A piano teacher, trumpet teacher, preschool music teacher, lots of music. But now mostly I look after my family. I have a few hours of teaching. I teach a scripture class at a local school. I basically just keep the household running, which is not easy. My favourite things to do are to read, to sing, but actually this time of year, my favourite thing to do is to find that warm spot in the house and sit with my back to it and feel like I'm defrosting. I'm sure most of you understand what I'm talking about. That is the best thing about winter, the defrosting sun on the back. Let me take you back to October 2014. My daughter needed a blood test. She needed it quite desperately, and she was terrified of the needles. So I was due for a blood test sometime soon, so I convinced my GP that I would do a blood test to show her that blood tests don't hurt and the needle was fine. And the great news is the next week when we got the results, my daughter's blood was fine and the problem wasn't related to blood. But my GP kept saying, you need to see a haematologist today. And then she said, I'm going to call one and find one who will see you as soon as possible. I'm a worst case scenario kind of girl. And I said, is it leukemia? Blood tests, you can have many things wrong with you. Leukemia is not the only option, just in case you're worried. But she didn't answer my question. And she hedged it. Well, we'll see what the haematologist said. And I've never known her not to answer my direct questions before. So I was beginning to worry. Then she rang around different haematologists in the area and a little bit further than our area. And what she didn't realise was she was doodling on a notepad as she rang. And she just kept doodling the word urgent over and over again. She said to me, I saw the blood test results on Friday night, and I thought, I won't tell her. I'll give her one last weekend of freedom. I love my GP, but it was terrifying. The next day I was diagnosed with chronic myeloid leukemia at the haematologist that she had found for me. It's an unusual leukemia. It's often been linked with exposure to radiation. So the atomic bombs at the end of World War II, a lot of people from that were diagnosed with chronic myeloid leukemia. Nowadays, it's just one of those unusual cancers that mostly men in their 60s get, and apparently me in my 30s. Life expectancy used to be 2 to 3 years from diagnosis, but CML has become one of those cancers that is now considered boring because they've worked out how to fix it. Not cure it, but how to stop it from continuing. In fact, after I got the diagnosis and Andrew was with me, I was very thankful to have a friend with me, my husband. They took me into a secret room and he wasn't allowed in, and I was absolutely terrified. And she said, all right, sit in that chair. And I sat down. And she said, roll up your sleeve. And I thought, okay, I can do a blood test. I'm good with blood tests. And then she got one of those kidney dishes and she put in empty vial after empty vial. And I thought, I don't think there's any blood left after you've taken my blood. There were about 14 of these tubes that she was getting ready. And I said, oh, that's a lot of my blood you're going to take. She said, oh, it's standard. And I don't understand why Andrew wasn't allowed in the room. And so she started taking it. I had just been diagnosed with leukemia, and I have to say, I think this is hilarious. After a while, things started to slow down, and I said, oh, I think this arm's empty. Do you want to try the other one? To this day, I think that's hilarious. She said, that is not how the circular system works, thank you. They don't have senses of humour. Anyway, scientists were able to work out at the end of the last century what exactly was happening with CML, chromosome 22, chromosome 9 splitting off, joining together, causing the cancer. And then about 10 years later, 20 years later, they worked out how to create a drug to stop that from thriving. It was one of the first cancers they have been able to do what we call targeted therapy for. So when you hear targeted therapy or immunotherapy, that's what it is. The oldest living survivor of CML was diagnosed and was told 2 to 3 years to live. After a year, he was put in one of the clinical trials, one of the first clinical trials. He's now lived with CML for 27 years. So life expectancy has massively changed for CML. Initially with my CML, I had to place some pretty unpleasant tests. I had a very big operation, and then I began the medication, 1 tablet once a day. I found some of the tests and some of what I was undergoing, I was very, very anxious. I was very unsure. Often I had to be on my own. But I had a particular psalm that was my go-to in the Bible, and I found it incredibly comforting. I was on a second-line drug, which means it was the second generation of drugs, for 8 years, this 1 tablet once a day, and it worked really well. I think a picture is going to come up of some of my bottles. That represents about 4.5 years of bottles. And in Australia, we are so blessed to have a government that pays for a lot of the cancer medication. So what you're looking at represents about $270,000 worth of medication that I paid about $1 a day for. It's incredible. We're very, very blessed to have most of the CML medications in Australia covered by PBS. And in the world of cancer, I've got a good one. Life expectancy is almost normal for 85% of the cases. They're good odds. And my cancer responded to the medication within 6 months. I was not detectable. I wasn't in remission because it was not detectable because of medication. But no medication, there's no medication that doesn't have side effects. So about 3 years ago, my lungs started to fill with fluid around the pleural lining of them, and it was difficult to breathe. So I had to get them drained. They changed the dose of medication, and about 8 months ago it came back again. So I can no longer take that medication. The good news is I'm now in a trial where I don't have to take medication at all. I am actually medication-free at the moment, and having done that for 6 months now, I'm considered in remission, which is amazing. So I'm very, very thankful. Will I stay in remission? They don't know enough. They still say that CML is incurable, so it is unlikely, but I will enjoy each day as it comes, and if it comes back, then they'll put me on a different medication. There's no guarantees with cancer. I feel like for me, my blood is super precious because the government is willing to pay a lot of money to make my blood work properly. And I love that. I did tell my kids originally that I was a mutant because my blood was mutating, but now I feel like my blood is just so precious. And I'm really thankful. My cancer story is a successful one. My life expectancy is normal. But not all cancer stories are like mine. About 15 months after I was diagnosed with leukemia, my second son Nathan, who was 15 years old at the time, started waking up with violently bad headaches, and that made him vomit. We took him to hospital, and eventually an MRI scan showed us that he had a brain tumour. We were rushed to Sydney Children's Hospital, and he had brain surgery the next night. When things happen quickly in the medical world, something's really wrong. I went from being a cancer patient to being the mother of a cancer patient. So, what do you say to your 15-year-old before he has brain surgery? We were all scared. And my beautiful boy was about to have such a huge surgery, and he was in so much pain, and he was terrified. What do you say to your son? What comfort or peace could I give him? I read him the psalm that I had found comforting every time I had to have a test, and I'd like to share that with you. It's Psalm 121. I lift my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore. Nathan and I found this great comfort, and I could see that it brought him peace in the middle of severe anxiety. And it gave me a sense of peace too. How beautiful are the words, where does my help come from? My help comes from the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. The Lord will keep you from all harm. It is such a good psalm to read before brain surgery. The great news is the neurosurgeon got all of the tumour. Nathan was released 2 days later, which astonishes me still. He was no longer in intense pain. He had to rest, and he couldn't play sport for a year, but things were looking up. But we all know that's not the end of the story. The bad news was that Nathan's journey with cancer was just beginning. A few weeks after the brain surgery, Nathan ended up in hospital again because something was very wrong. The biopsy of his brain tumour had been sent overseas because it was proving very difficult to identify. And it was during this hospital stay that it was discovered that Nathan had a tumour in the left ventricle of his heart. This was, doctors believe, the primary tumour, and this was exceedingly rare. In fact, this was so rare that they had never seen it before at the Children's Hospital, and one doctor had seen it once, 30 years earlier. Nathan's heart was pumping cancer cells through his blood around his body. And a PET scan showed that he had a tumour in his hip bone, in his lungs, in his arm. Nathan was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and we were told he was going to die. Any treatment would be experimental and was not expected to work. As a mother, there was little I could do. I could care for Nathan and I could pray, and I felt so helpless. And I couldn't fix the situation. My expensive, amazing blood couldn't help his blood that was spreading the cancer, because my blood only works for me. Do you know the saddest place at the Children's Hospital? You might think it's the oncology ward, but that was not my experience. The saddest place is the parents' bathroom opposite the oncology ward, because that's where you'll hear the most crying from each private toilet cubicle. And then when the women come out, they wash their hands and they wash their face, they take a big breath, and then they put their pretend face on that everything is okay and that their child will defy the odds, and they go back into that oncology ward and pretend that everything's fine. But the reality is those toilet cubicles. I'd like to tell you a bit about Nathan. He was a remarkable boy. He was kind, he was gentle, he was feisty, he was strong. When he was 3 years old, I was pregnant with my 4th child, and I couldn't walk at the end of that pregnancy. And Nathan went through that 3-year-old stubborn phase that we all love. And I'd say, "Nathan, come here." And he'd look at me and he'd say, "No, make me." I'm thinking, if I get over to you, you will not enjoy the make me. He was so feisty. But he was also a kid who years later, when one of my other sons had run off and was in actual quite significant danger, I couldn't pull over the car, there was no parking spot. And Nathan said, "Just pull over, I'll hop out and get him, Mum." And I said, "Okay." And I pulled over, Nathan ran off without shoes on and ran over gravel and dirt and a whole lot of things and shredded both feet. Saved his brother, brought him back to the car, and then said, "Mum, I'm so sorry, there's blood everywhere." And I said, "Oh, mate, don't worry about it." And later he said to me quietly, "Mum, I would have done it again. It was worth it." He was truly a remarkable boy. He'd saved his brother. He did things like that all the time. He was the kid that when I said, "Hey, let's go for a late night shop and get something fun," "I'm in, Mum, I'm in." Run and get his shoes. "What are we going to get?" And it wasn't about what we were going to get, it was about walking through the aisles of the supermarket to chat. That was Nathan. He was always, "Let's have a debrief about this, Mum." Anyway, with the treatment, because he was 15 years old, he got to choose, and everything was experimental. He was told that in all likelihood he would die, and Nathan's attitude towards medical help was, "Just give it to me straight. Tell me the truth. Don't hedge." So the doctor said, "You will die," and he said, "Okay, what are the options?" And the options were chemotherapy, but all experimental, and he said, "Bring it on. What have I got to lose?" So he had 11 rounds of chemotherapy. It was gruelling. And at the end of that time, he had 5 new, rapidly growing brain tumours. And he was in a lot of pain at the end. And in the last couple of weeks of his life, he suffered significantly, and he died. And he was 16 years old. So where was God in all this? Where was my peace? Had God stepped back from Nathan and from me? And Nathan prayed for healing, I prayed for healing, and I do believe that God could have healed him at any point in this journey. Had God stepped away from us? Watching your son in pain is agony. A few weeks before Nathan died, he laid across my bed and he said, "Mum, I'm going to die, and I'm never going to have a girlfriend, and I'm never going to get married, and I'm never going to have any children. I'm not going to go to uni, I'm not going to have a job, and so many people in this world have no plans, and I have so many things I want to do." How do you answer that? What could I possibly say to him? What he was saying was absolutely true. I sat down next to him and I held his hand and I said, "I know, and it's breaking my heart too." Throughout this journey, I knew that God cared for me deeply, but after a while, certain verses became really difficult to understand. And in moments of doubt, this psalm that I had loved so much when I was anxious, that I had used at the beginning of Nathan's cancer journey, it started to feel like a lie. I felt like God wasn't listening to my prayers, even though I knew he was. I felt like he didn't care how much my family was suffering or how much pain my boy was in. I felt like he was not my helper anymore. He wasn't keeping my son from harm. I felt like he wasn't holding us, and I felt a little bit like he was like the lady in the supermarket, although that hadn't happened yet, that he had stepped right back away from us. Nathan's pain came back with such intensity, and the medication regime we were following was intense and difficult, and Nathan's body was failing him. He started having mini seizures, which terrified him, understandably, and 2 days before Christmas, one of his arms stopped working altogether. No 16-year-old boy wants one arm not to work. And no doubt, as many as you know, the thing about looking after someone with cancer when they're dying from cancer is that you slowly watch the person die, bit by bit, body function by body function. And it hurts. It truly, truly hurts to watch. Nathan made a few requests for the summer. He wanted me to read to him the story of Jesus' life, written by Mark in the Bible. It's the shortest of the 4 Gospels. And he wanted to go on a family holiday. So we packed our bags, we found a house, took the kids away for a holiday up to the Hunter Valley. We travelled up on Monday. And on Tuesday morning we had to call an ambulance for Nathan because he was in so much pain and he couldn't move without vomiting. And on Tuesday afternoon it was clear that we wouldn't be taking Nathan home. The doctors weren't sure how long Nathan was going to take to die, but he was too sick to leave the hospital. So on Wednesday morning, when Nathan and I woke up, I said to him, "Hey mate, do you still want to read that book by Mark?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "How about we just do that today? I'll read, and when you get tired, you can say, 'That's enough, Mum.' And when you wake up, if you want to read the next bit, I'll read again." And that's what we did all that day. Mark's a short book, thankfully, and we just read a few chapters at a time, and then he'd say, "That's enough, Mal." I'd say, "Okay, you have a sleep, darling." And then when he'd wake up, he'd say, "Can we read the next bit?" Andrew was able to join us in the evening for the last 2 chapters, and I was really thankful for that. And at the end of that time, after I'd finished reading all of the chapters, Andrew and Nathan and I prayed together. And Andrew thanked God for Nathan, thanked God for the opportunity to read God's word, thanked God for Jesus. And at the end of that prayer, Nathan said, "Amen." And that was the last word we heard him speak. He died the next morning on Thursday. And we drove home from that holiday on Friday morning with one less child in the car. The thing is though, the night before Nathan died, as I was sitting by his bedside holding his hand, praying for him, I sat thinking about that book that we'd been reading all day. And I started to understand Psalm 121 again. And that night, I didn't know it was going to be Nathan's last night. No one thought it would be. I refound my peace. You see, I couldn't save Nathan. My beautiful, expensive, amazing blood couldn't save him. But I just read a book about Jesus pouring out his blood for Nathan. Here I was calling out to God about my pain and my hurt, and there I read a book about how God sent his son to die for my son. God didn't step back like the lady in the supermarket. God didn't even stand still. He actually stepped in towards us. And he said to us, "I give my son to heal the biggest problem Nathan has, and it's not cancer. It's brokenness from me." That is so profound. And you know what else? God totally understands my pain. Because guess who else lost a son? He gets it. And then I saw anew that night all the many ways that God had been sending people into our lives to help us throughout the whole journey. And for those of you who are walking beside someone with cancer or sickness, here are some things that maybe you might be able to pick 1 or 2. People prayed for us. I can't describe the encouragement it was in knowing that people were praying for Nathan and for our family. People anonymously gave us money for the hospital car park, money for a family holiday, and bags and bags and bags of groceries were left on our doorstep anonymously. Looking after a child with cancer is very expensive, and getting to the supermarket is very hard. People helped with our other kids and often sent us photos from school events that we couldn't attend. And we had all sorts of people just take one of our kids under their wing and do special things with them with their own family. The teachers at our school made our children's school lunches every day for the rest of the year and would have kept going even after Nathan had died if I hadn't said, "That's enough now, thank you." And they didn't just make the lunches, they found out what each child that they were assigned actually liked for lunch and spent a lot of time making special lunches for them every single day. 2 women from school, 2 teachers they were, went to Christmas shopping and bought a whole heap of Christmas presents unbeknownst to us for our family and wrapped them all and dropped them off on our doorstep. People visited Nathan. They didn't withdraw from him, but key people who he knew spent time with him, brought him a nice meal, treated him like he was just normal old Nathan, not Nathan with cancer. They prayed with him, they hung out with him, and they listened to him. Families from our church offered cleaning their homes. At one point it looked like Nathan wouldn't be able to walk up and down stairs, and our house was up 20 stairs. And so another family from church said, "Do you know what, you can come live in our house, we'll swap houses for as long as you like." Their house had just been renovated, it's like a palace. Some of my kids weren't too pleased when we said no. But Nathan showed that he could walk up the stairs safely, so we didn't need to move. A group of people from my church back then renovated one of the bedrooms specifically for Nathan so that when he came home from hospital, he had his own sofa, his own TV, new carpet, new paint, and a lovely comfortable bed. People did gardening for us. Men came over and did repairs on the house. In fact, there are so many things that people did for us, I cannot mention them all. And in that, the night before Nathan died, I saw God's incredible kindness. Our parents were amazing. One set of parents lived really close to the hospital, and they were on call day and night to help me get Nathan into emergency, and then they went and parked my car for me. They brought up meals for me each night, and for Andrew if he wanted them, and they came and sat with Nathan so that I could have a shower. The other set of grandparents were on call day and night for our youngest child who wasn't at school yet, and he went to stay with them for many months that year. And in all of these things, I saw God's incredible kindness in providing a phenomenal network of help and encouragement. And besides all of that, I personally received hundreds and hundreds of emails, text messages, notes, cards, offering a Bible verse, or just "I'm praying for you and Nathan today." Not only did God send his son for Nathan, he surrounded us with a huge army of prayer warriors and practical help. This may surprise some of you, but before Nathan died, while he was still sick, my biggest fear wasn't Nathan's death. I didn't want him to die. I did everything possible to give him longer life. But his death wasn't my greatest fear. As a mother, my deep-seated fear was that Nathan would be alone, where I couldn't go and look after him. From the day I found out I was pregnant with Nathan, and with all my kids, but with Nathan, my job was to protect and care for him. And I was there for the band-aids, the stitches, the tears, the chemotherapy, the sleepless nights, the sad conversations. I was there to hold his hand, to sit and pray with him, to cover him with a blanket, to ask for his medication to be given. But where he was going, I could no longer go. And although Nathan was strong and kind and gentle, he was my boy. And this tore at me day after day, more than his impending death. But the night before he died, I looked back at that psalm. The night before he died, this was the discovery I made. God is not promising that his people won't die. He's promising that when one of his people dies, they will not be alone. Is Nathan safe where he is now? Yes, absolutely. God promised that he will not let Nathan's foot slip. No harm will come to Nathan. And suddenly this psalm that I had loved so much for my journey, and we had both loved so much at the beginning of Nathan's journey, became my peace. And I don't mean an empty platitude peace. I didn't have time for that. My son was dying before my eyes. I mean a deep, profound peace in truth. My son was going to be okay, and he was never going to be left alone. And it's all right there in Psalm 121. The Lord never sleeps or slumbers. He will watch over Nathan's coming and going both now and forevermore. And if God loves my son so much that he sent his one and only son for my son, then I know my son's in the very best of hands. And so when the time came for Nathan to breathe his last here, I knew he was going straight to the arms of Jesus, and he would have no more suffering and no more pain and no more cancer. I knew Nathan was at peace. And the night before Nathan died, I had a peace that surpasses understanding. And although I miss my Nathan desperately, I cry very easily about him. I grieve and I mourn, and I find it hard when I see kids that look like him, or when I see his friends get to do the things that Nathan dreamt of doing. I also have peace about Nathan. I have incredible peace this day, every day. So whether you have cancer or not, God has stepped in towards each of us too. What are you going to do about it? I can honestly say that this peace is worth finding out about. Will you have the peace that Nathan and I found? Do you want this peace? In the face of cancer, in the face of death, this peace really does make all the difference. Thank you.
Phew. Thank you, Ruth, very, very much. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing from the heart. How brave was that? How inspiring. How deeply moving. I'm actually going to draw our formalities to a close now, but please don't feel that's the signal to hurry away by any means. Please stay and chat. And I do want to just say a quick, very genuine thank you to so many ladies who helped make the event happen this evening, and we're so grateful. And I guess we're left with the reminder, aren't we, that even in the darkest times there can be peace. That feels improbable. And even in the darkest times there's a hope worth having, a hope that delivers, a hope that doesn't disappoint, a hope that will last. As I say, it can seem improbable, impossible, but I can also say with humility, there are many of us here who have found it. A joyful hope in the future based on truth in the past that changes everything right now. And I guess we just wanted to leave you tonight with the opportunity, if that is something that you would like to think about, if you maybe don't feel confident about your peace, your hope, that we would just like to offer a 3-week group that I will lead on hope. And we would do it here at church, and it would be very safe, very gentle. And if you would like to do that, on your tables there is a form like this that is a way that we could contact you if you would like help in any way, actually, but particularly if you want to talk more about these things that Ruth has raised. Would you please fill that in, and I'll just give you a phone call and talk about it and see if it would be helpful to you. And what I think would be best if you could fill it in and just give it to Hayley up the back as you're leaving. That would be fantastic. Also on the table you'll see we've got this little bit of paper. It's got 2 books that we would recommend. You may not want to come to a group, but you might like to read something. And there's 2 books on there and a phone number of a bookshop that you could call to order that over the phone and have it posted to you if you didn't want to drive all the way to West Ryde, which is a fair way, but they have those books. So I guess I want to say thank you to all of you for coming. We've really enjoyed being together. Let's see if we can continue talking. And we just want to say God bless you as you go, and we hope to see you again. Thank you very much.